It is the biggest scoop in years. 11.5 million leaked documents disclosing the complex, murky world of global tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, and even drug trafficking. The documents, amounting to 2.6 terabytes of data, were initially leaked to the Süddeutsche Zeitung in 2015. But the newspaper, given the scale of documentation, sought the help of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The documents were leaked from Mossack Fonseca, the world's fourth largest offshore law firm, which deals with the finances of politicians, celebrities, millionaires and billionaires, helping them to avoid taxes and other legal restrictions and recycle money. Already the leaks have claimed their first political scalp, as the Prime Minister of Iceland has been forced to resign after it was revealed that he had been among those who used offshore tax havens to avoid taxes, as The Guardian reports. British Prime Minister David Cameron has been put into some difficulties as well, as it was revealed that his father had invested money in offshore funds. Cameron initially attempted to deny that he had personally profited from this, only to later admit that he had, explained here by The Economist. This, after years of Cameron carefully detoxing the Conservative brand, has threatened to poison it again. Conservative Mayor of London Boris Johnson squirmed when asked about offshore tax avoidance, refusing to condemn the practice, as The Independent reports. Dictatorships like the Syrian regime have also been found to be using the tax havens to evade sanctions. As Al Jazeera put it, the Seychelles saved the Syrian regime. This, it seems, is only just scratching the surface. The leaked documents in their millions amount to an indictment of the global rich, exposing the extraordinary lengths and breadths they go to in order to protect their wealth and cover their crimes. Or rather, they would if we had a different media. For the first thing that the journalists involved with this scoop did was to set themselves some fairly stringent limits. Gerald Ryle, the director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, is quoted in the popular technology website Wired as saying that the media organisations have no plans to release the full dataset, WikiLeaks style, which he argues would expose the sensitive information of innocent, private individuals along with the public figures on which the group's reporting has focused. We're not WikiLeaks. We're trying to show that journalism can be done responsibly, Ryle says. This gratuitous swipe at an organisation whose leaks of information included major exposés of US power, war crimes, torture, civilian casualties and official lies is odd, coming from a group whose major yield from 11.5 million documents is to inculpate the Prime Minister of Iceland. The Guardian also insisted that much of the leaked material will remain private. Süddeutsche Zeitung has confirmed that this is also its approach, saying the complete set of documents won't be made available to the public or to law enforcement agencies. That's because the Süddeutsche Zeitung isn't the extended arm of prosecutors or the tax investigators. In this context, Al Jazeera's programme The Listening Post asks whether the media involved with the reporting have actually censored the story by deliberately withholding information that could be in the public interest. So what does doing journalism responsibly involve? What should be published and what should be kept secret? The Süddeutsche Zeitung, in its guide about the Panama Papers, explains the methodology as follows. The journalists compiled lists of important politicians, international criminals, and well-known professional athletes, among others. The digital processing made it possible to then search the leak for the names on these lists. The party donation scandal list contained 130 names, and the UN sanctions list more than 600. In just a few minutes, the powerful search algorithm compared the lists with the 11.5 million documents. The major focus then was on those subject to UN sanctions and using offshore tax havens and law firms as a means to evade the sanctions. This is an exceptionally narrow line of investigation, given that the documents cover some 40 years from the 1970s onward, and potentially involves hundreds of thousands of businesses. Former British diplomat Craig Murray used his website to express dismay with this method, suggesting that the research method protected the Western 1%, and asking, what if they did Mossack Fonseca database searches on the owners of all the corporate media and their companies, and all the editors and senior corporate media journalists? Given the narrowness of their focus, it perhaps isn't surprising that the results of the investigation are oddly skewed. Many newspapers, for example, took the intriguing step of foregrounding the corruption of one Vladimir Putin who, though undoubtedly corrupt, is not himself named in the papers. The Guardian's first major story on the papers, headlined "Revealed," the $2 billion offshore trail that leads to Vladimir Putin. It discloses how close friends of Vladimir Putin have become fabulously wealthy through a series of offshore deals, and adds, "The document suggests Putin's family has benefited from this money. His friends' fortunes appear his to spend." It also produced a short video on the papers, leading with Putin's visage and explaining how to hide $1 billion. CNN describes the same story before adding, "Putin's name is not on any of the documents. He is the legal owner, it seems, of nothing untoward. But this only shows how corruption really works in Russia. Putin favours his allies with lucrative contracts and favourable loans, not cash." And this may be true, but what if Putin and his oligarch allies only account for a fraction of the global wealth being protected in tax havens? And what if the link to Putin is relatively obscure and based on inference and circumstantial evidence? The Washington Post has the answer. Blame Putin for the leak. That's right, the newspaper reports a theory advanced by Clifford Gaddy of the Brookings Institution, which suggests that if Putin is not sufficiently incriminated by the leak, then he must be the mastermind behind it. The theory even suggests that the failure of the leak to thus far incriminate a single leading American politician or businessman means that Putin is holding back information for potential blackmail. It is true that the power players listed on the official International Consortium of Investigative Journalists website doesn't include a single politician or businessman from the United States. But there are a number of possible explanations for this. One is that American billionaires prefer to take advantage of opportunities for tax evasion in the United States, such as Delaware, the legal home of 285,000 American businesses as of 2012, thanks to its reputation as a haven from taxes and regulations. The New York Times quoted economist James Henry saying that Americans don't really need to go to Panama to hide wealth. They have access to an onshore haven industry. Another is that the narrow focus of the investigation and the suppression of information has meant that any members of the American 1% who do use Mossack Fonseca are simply not being publicly identified. The point is not to deny Putin's corruption and authoritarianism, but to suggest that a media which behaves like this may just be a little bit obsessed with scapegoating the Russian leader for the ills of the world, and in its way is a mirror image of Putin himself calling a press conference to denounce the papers as a conspiracy against him. The ideological reactions of the international media are just as instructive as their particular investigative focus, and these are very clear in their editorial columns. The New York Times editorializes with considerable fire and brimstone against the global elite of politicians, dictators, criminals, billionaires and celebrities, but, lest anyone draw the conclusion that the Times has turned against its core audience, reminds everyone that offshore banking is not in itself illegal, and not all those named should be presumed to have done wrong. It is only chiefly problematic because it allows overseas rogues with ill-gotten gains, whether in Iceland, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia or Malaysia, to escape accountability. The Guardian, for its part, does acknowledge that there is something problematic even in legal tax evasion, and is particularly concerned that if such practices go on, people may regard their rulers with automatic contempt. This may be appropriate in dictatorships, but is harmful and potentially disastrous in the liberal democracies. Meanwhile, the Washington Post has simply lost control of the anti-Bernie Sanders animus that has been driving its editors and journalists mad in recent months. Its major editorial on the Panama Papers is headlined, "The Panama Papers prove Mr. Sanders was wrong about a trade pact with Panama." That's right. The American capital's paper of record saw in the Panama Papers an opportunity to once again belabor the senator from Vermont, this time for opposing a free trade pact with Panama. But even if the media organizations involved in this leak are keeping a tight lid on the data, even if they have thus far pursued a narrow agenda, and even if they have used the revelations to pursue their own frankly bizarre hobby horses, it is too soon to write off the Panama Papers as a disappointment. Practically all media outlets agree that there is a lot more to come. The BBC, in its jaunty listicle identifying 10 things we've learned from the papers, acknowledges that so far we've read only a small percentage of the total number of documents. According to the Latin Times, even Panama, and these leaks concern only one firm operating there, is a minuscule piece of the total business of the tax avoidance industry, with some 60 to 65 other countries hosting the same industries. The tax havens hold around 8% of global financial wealth, approximately $7.6 trillion, according to Al Jazeera. The big stories may yet be to come, but the big picture has been known for some time. The problem is not just a number of international rogues with stolen money. The problem is precisely that, as the New York Times says, and Mossack Fonseca stridently insists, there is nothing illegal about most of this. Tax resistance on the part of the rich, a means of class war, has been escalating globally since the 1980s, and it is all within the law. And if we had a better media, the stories we are hearing would be telling us about that.